Hello, everybody. It is Saturday, April the 19th, 2025. It's time for our That Was the Week Tech Roundup. I usually don't take these things personally, but given that my dear wife is a senior lawyer at a small company, startup called Google, I was rather insulted by Keith's title of his newsletter this week, Google and Meta. Are they screwed? Keith, that was rather vulgar, isn't it? Do we really want to screw Google and Meta?
We may not want to, but the justice system in the United States certainly seems to want to. And this week, there were major milestones in both companies' cases. Meta started a trial. This is bizarre, but the trial was asking the question, was it legitimate that they acquired Instagram and WhatsApp, which, by the way, happened in 2012 and 2014, respectively. So more than 10 years later, the government decided it made a mistake to approve them and is now litigating. It's the first week, so we'll see what happens. Then Google actually was found guilty. The headlines are guilty of being a monopoly.
Yeah, the New York Times headlines, Google broke the law to keep its advertising monopoly, a judge ruled. The second time this has happened. And not just the government that's looking back. Keith, you're citing pieces you wrote for TechCrunch back in 2012 when Meta acquired Instagram. It's always easy to sort of relitigate these things, or perhaps convenient to relitigate them. Hindsight, of course, is 2020. Could we have imagined this kind of bizarre scenario back in 2012 when Facebook acquired Instagram?
I think we couldn't, because
you and I, or
you and I, and probably most of the people who watch this show understand that that was a time when the iPhone was 5 years old and had transformed consumer use of the internet. And Facebook was a web company in those days, and Google was a search engine mainly on the desktop. So both companies had a mortal threat called mobile. Android had not yet.
Yeah, and you do a good job. I mean, your piece looks actually back from 2012 for TechCrunch looks very prescient that this was all about mobile, which in retrospect, I think you were absolutely right. Although, of course, mobile now is also a kind of anachronism.
Yeah, exactly. But I think the trick to answering the question is it legitimate for a company threatened with death to attempt to be relevant in a new era of technology, mobile? Is making acquisitions okay? And the idea that a company facing death is a monopoly, if you put it into,
I mean, that's your polemical take. I mean, you've even entitled, you put your cards on the table, Keith. You've even entitled this whole thing with Google and Facebook in your links, government overreach. You're sounding more and more libertarian. I mean, Google, going back to Facebook, I mean, in 2012, there wasn't an existential crisis. Maybe Mike Isaac writes an interesting piece for the New York Times asking, what if Mark Zuckerberg had not bought Instagram and WhatsApp? Yeah. I mean, Facebook wouldn't be, a $1 trillion or $2 trillion company. It'd still be around. It wouldn't go away, would it?
Well, it would go through an existential crisis, because Facebook, what is Facebook? It's a way of packaging content for consumers at huge global scale, 2 to 3 billion people. So if global consumers move to mobile and use their desktop-based web less and less, unless Facebook can effectively go there and transform itself, it's going to lose its audience. So I think these things are real. If you're sitting on the management team of Facebook in 2012 through 2015, you would be facing some serious problems. And I think Zuckerberg's emails this week bear that out. By the way, the emails show him to be a very thoughtful, prescient, strategic leader as well.
Yeah, and I mean, it only underlines the fact that every company is always facing an existential threat. The innovator's dilemma is as true for Facebook and Google as it is for OpenAI today. I'm sure Sam Altman, if he has Zuckerberg's strategic sense, is already trying to think 2 or 3 moves ahead of everybody else. So isn't that somehow inevitable? So are you, I mean, is this, the more this stuff happens with the government trying to unravel, say, I'm no fan of Google, I'm certainly no fan of Facebook or Zuckerberg, but the absurdity of the government trying to unravel the Instagram deal suggests to me that the law really doesn't matter. It's all about politics and it's all about public sentiment. I mean, the law can be used by anyone for any purposes if they choose to.
I think you're right to be that, let's say that's cynical, but I think it's accurate. The tell is that the government's ask of the judge, if they win the case, is to fine Facebook $30 billion,
which isn't a lot for Facebook. I mean, Facebook would presumably if that was the end of all this stuff, they would pay that and move on.
It is a lot for them, to be honest, but yes, they probably would figure out a way to pay it and move on. And that's what happened to Microsoft, by the way. If you remember a decade earlier, when the DOJ successfully prosecuted Microsoft, Microsoft itself had an existential crisis with the internet, had another one with Web 2, and now, 30 years later, is ascendant again by playing the game well. And I think the real question is it right to punish these companies for things that happened a long time ago? Google's a trickier case than Meta. I think it's very straightforward. Google's trickier because the threat to Google in that era that led to them building out their advertising. They bought DoubleClick. I don't know if you remember when that happened.
Yeah, but that was in what, about 2001?
Yeah, and that's for display advertising, which is when you see those big like brand advertisements, which Google didn't play in up until that point. Now, this case is not about that. This case decided that Google doesn't have a monopoly in display advertising, but does have a monopoly in the exchange marketplace for regular Google-style ads. And so what happened there? There's 2 dimensions to it. One is the government's dimension. They reduced the definition of Google's business down to a tool that Google uses, an exchange, if you will. And by shrinking the definition of a monopoly, and that is worth 11% of Google's revenue. So it's not even that meaningful to Google. They wouldn't like to lose it, but they could lose it and still survive. So this really is a desperate legal case trying to find something winnable by shrinking the scope. Google, on the other hand, its existential threat is what we all know as cost per click advertising. Cost per click advertising is when you do a search and you click on a search result that's being paid for. And we do that less and less of the time, and advertisers are paying less and less per click when we do it. So Google's core business is in dollar terms is shrinking, and they need to have alternative revenue streams, and that only gets accelerated in this world of AI, where ads don't really sit very neatly alongside AI results. So I think Google's got an existential crisis bigger than Meta's right now.
So in other words, to borrow some words from you, Google is more screwed than Meta. I'm going to tell my wife that.
Well, being screwed is a relative term. If you put a timeline on
it, doesn't sound very relative to me. It seems fairly, the opposite of relative is absolute. Either you're screwed or you're not. You can't be half screwed, can you, Keith?
Yeah, but let's not drill down into that one. But
well, we can drill down it. Excuse me.
But look, the reason I put the quotes from my writings in TechCrunch is they were 12 years ago, 13 years ago, and I predicted they were screwed then, unless they succeed. In the case of Meta,
that goes without saying, you're always screwed if you don't succeed.
Right.
Especially in tech.
In the case of Meta, they did. In the case of Google, they really didn't adjust, but it's such a slow process to get rid of search advertising that the impact on them has been, much.
But it's the same as
less.
Microsoft. I mean, Microsoft fell onto desktop publishing. They had, quote unquote, a monopoly, and they've depended on that and adapted their business over the last 25 years. Google will do the same. I mean, that's the nature of corporations. They fall on the golden egg, and then they have to reinvent anyone. You had one very nice phrase, Keith, from your editorial this week. Nobody can accuse the government of being fast. I think that's the biggest understatement of them all. I mean, the cliche is the government's always fighting the last war. It isn't even the last war. This is the war before the last war.
Exactly. It's shocking. And I think you have to conclude that this was, and not to personalize it, but I think this was Lena Khan looking for a win.
Oh, no, you had to drag Lena in. She's not even around anymore. Why do you have to blame up poor Lena?
Because I think she was the catalyst, along with Elizabeth Warren, by the way.
It's always the women. What about Tim Wu? He was on my show. He has as much to blame.
I'm less familiar with him, so I can't blame him.
Yeah, you always blame the women, Keith. Poor Elizabeth Warren and the other one. What your graduate? What did you used to call her? A graduate student?
That's what she is. She's
no longer a graduate student. Do you think she's going back to graduate school? She'll probably get thrown out of the country by the Trump people for being un-American. You would probably if you ran justice, would you throw her out of the country?
I would not, because I am actually a believer in pretty unregulated immigration.
But in all seriousness, this headline stuff, does it really matter? I mean, it matters to the people at Google and Meta, but in a broader, in the broader history of technology, things move so fast that these companies will adapt and reinvent themselves. Some will be damaged, some won't. And meanwhile, now it's OpenAI, which is driving technology forward. And Google and Facebook are wannabes. You've written off Google. I'm not so convinced. Meta's Llama initiative is an interesting variant on OpenAI. But what is the historical significance here?
Well, you have to imagine removing these two companies from the playing field and put a date on that.
Well, they're not removing them. They're splitting. I mean, no one's talking about closing down Facebook or Google.
No, but just as an intellectual exercise, imagine, let's put quotes around removing, but fundamentally change their ability to play the role they play today. If you would have done that 10 years ago to either Google or Meta, it would have had a pretty major impact on what happened next. If you do it today, I think it almost has zero impact. I mean, if you can imagine, let's imagine Google was literally closed down. I don't think anyone would notice after about a month. I think there's enough other things to find what you want that you wouldn't miss it. And Meta, not only would you not miss it, you might cheer at the rooftops.
Well, I mean, Facebook, you just use TikTok.
I think depending on the use case, you'd use LinkedIn for business relationships. You'd use WhatsApp and messaging for personal relationships. You wouldn't use it for news.
But WhatsApp, you mean, would continue to exist? They would just be split off.
If they, even if they cease to exist, there's plenty of tools out there to replace them that are good, that people know about. And so it was interesting this week, OpenAI, it was rumored they might build a Twitter competitor. And there's an article by Thomas Tungers this week saying, social AI, I want to know your AI work. Like, if you could see what I do with AI, it would be enlightening, actually, because I do some quite unique things that are unique to me, but have general applicability. So I think we're at a moment where literally we don't need either Google or Meta. So the government's case not only is late, it's irrelevant.
Yeah, and some of the articles this week agree with you. MG Siegler, who's been one of the most accurate and intelligent observers over the last 20 years of tech. He started at TechCrunch, argues in one of the pieces you linked to that without Instagram, Meta is screwed. And the New York Times, as always, is running pieces about what history can teach us about breaking up giant companies. What does it teach us? That it matters or it doesn't matter? I mean, the Microsoft case is interesting. And I know you don't agree with this, I've always thought that breaking up Microsoft, not so much breaking up Microsoft, but forcing Microsoft to take its eyes off the ball in the mid-90s enabled the Web 2.0 revolution. Is there any truth? Is that what's happening now? Is that this is enabling the AI revolution, the open AIs and all the other AI startups to become real?
I think I would say no. I think that use Yahoo as a really good example of a company that the government didn't interfere with. Despite that, it had absolute freedom to determine its future. It didn't anticipate or understand how to react to Web 2.
Well, I think with Yahoo, I don't again relitigate, but Yahoo was destroyed by Google because they automated search, whereas
that's true, but that's an earlier moment. You're right about that. And Yahoo was I engaged with Yahoo at a very senior level at that point in their history, and they were militant in not wanting to monetize when people click on a link. They wanted people to not click on links. They wanted them to stay inside Yahoo. So they had this like NBC mentality of being
the walled garden. What was that? What did they had the opportunity to buy Google? What was it, for $1 billion?
$1 billion, exactly. So
not one of the great errors in history, although you buy them, you're damned. If you don't buy them, you're damned. Had Yahoo acquired Google, now it would be Yahoo that would be being broken up, probably.
Well, actually, if you get to the fundamental reason to even mention Yahoo, it's that technological shifts blindside zealotry. If you're a zealot, and in any given era there are zealots, because that in order
your dog's a zealot, Keith. Every time we start talking, it starts barking.
Yeah. So basically, in every technological era produces zealots for the era. And they always, I mean, with a capital A, with a possible exception of Zuckerberg, who seems to have, understand how history works, they almost always get blindsided and end up running last era's thing into the ground. And that's Yahoo. Now, Microsoft didn't do that. Despite the DOJ, they changed their leadership and they changed their strategy.
Yeah, I'm not sure about Google. I've done a number of shows recently on Google's leadership, and there's more and more talk of Demis Hassabis eventually taking over there. Their CEO is a bit of a bureaucrat at the moment. So, every company is different. So really, when the smoke clears, there really isn't any news here. Is that what you're suggesting?
The only news is how stupid the government and the law courts are.
Well, that's not exactly news. You're making me more and more of a libertarian like you, government overreach. I mean, in the age of Trump, what does Trump want here? He just wants more money. He probably wants Facebook's $30 billion to go into Truth Social.
I think Trump is not even a player here because he's inherited all of this. I think Trump just, has no regard at all for Zuckerberg or for Google.
And well, they say nice things about him.
Where he would have done something to stop Musk being sued. He's not going to do anything to stop these guys losing, because he doesn't care about them because they damaged him in the past. So Trump's just looking at this through a personal pair of glasses, and therefore he's really irrelevant to the whole thing.
Well, the broader context, of course, which we've talked about many times, is the end of the West. We did an editorial last week on that. You have a couple of interesting pieces linked to that, especially Tom Friedman, who's been very outspoken this week on China, what China's doing right and what America is doing wrong. He was on the Ezra Klein show. I'm not a big fan of Friedman, but I thought he was quite good. And Peter Orszag, CEO of Lazard, was also on the Klein show. What's the news this week on the decline of the West and the rise of China? Last week you suggested it was pretty much inevitable. Has anything changed in a week on that front, Keith?
Actually, you know, the most interesting thing in this context this week, which isn't in the newsletter because it doesn't really fit into a tech newsletter, is Vance was interviewed by the British podcast Unheard on his attitude towards Europe. And Vance made the point that America was wrong in the Suez Crisis and has been wrong several times since, and that Europe shouldn't and can't depend on America to fight its battles, because America will almost always take a different view and it will often be wrong. I thought it was amazing that he started with that. And he went on to talk about how it's good for America if Europe remilitarizes and looks after itself. And good in two contexts. One is it's good for Europe, and two, it's good to have a third pole in a tripolar world where China and America are the other two. And what that tells you is the American establishment now in the Trump administration is 100% committed to deglobalization at the political and military level.
Yeah, I'm not sure you could call it an American. It's a counter-establishment, and I'm not sure.
Well, whatever it is,
sounds like he's in a law school seminar, so I'm not sure whether he counts for anything, whether anyone listens to him. Certainly within the administration,
he was listened to in Europe. That story traveled worldwide almost immediately and was everywhere, and the reason is it was a pretty fundamental, deep statement of how the Trump administration is looking at the world and America's role within it. So this retreat into fiefdoms is deep seated, I would say. And if you go along with that, then the tariffs are completely irrational. And this is what I try to get to in the editorial. Economic globalization is not only good, it's required for prosperity. And it doesn't necessarily have to correlate to social withdrawal into more local.
Harari, I can't remember, I think it was in the New York Times. The Israeli historian Harari had an interesting piece on this transformation of the world into fiefdoms. He's less optimistic than you. Is there a connection, though, Keith, these two main stories in your editorial, indeed in the world this week, in the various antitrust cases against big tech and the China-America economic story? Are they really the same stories, or are they in parallel?
I think they all at the root have the same variables governing them, which is companies want to be global and nations don't. Economies do, but not nations.
Unless, like America, it's a unipolar world, and by becoming global, the world becomes American.
Yeah, well, I actually would put it the other way around. The word globalization is only ever been used when there's a single dominant world power. There's never been a globalization that's even and balanced. There's an economic theory called the theory of uneven and combined development that posits that there never can be a true balance.
Yeah, and I hope we're not agreeing too much, but I think that's also a very good point, and that the American version of globalization is being replaced really by the Chinese version.
Or by none. It could be by none. That globalization now is about Facebook, Google, Tesla. I make the point Tesla is ahead of this because it's got factories in Shanghai, Munich, and in Texas, and therefore tariffs don't really impact it in those local markets. And so you've got globalizing companies retreating nations or supersets of nations like Europe and the Americas, and then within the region, it makes complete sense of Trump being desirous of owning Greenland and Canada, because he's retreating into regional power. And you know, it's kind of massively disconcerting, but it reflects the truth that probably for the next 100 years, there won't be a single global leader, unless it's China, and I doubt that, because I don't think China wants to be a global leader.
Well, 100 years is a long time. You're sounding pessimistic. I might be the optimist this week. Our interview of the week, not that I'm a self-promotional type, is an interview with me from Keen on America by my friend David Maschiotto, in which I explain why I'm still reasonably optimistic about the American dream and American innovation. I'm not sure that necessarily means America has to be the dominant world power, or that globalization has to be done with American values within an American architecture. But people should have a look at that. Meanwhile, tech still moves at where the government moves at glacial pace, the tech moves the opposite, increasing acceleration. In TechCrunch, there's a very interesting piece that you linked to, that Jack Dorsey and Elon Musk, who aren't always the closest of friends, would like to delete all IP law. I assume that Sam Altman, who isn't a great friend either of Elon Musk, would agree. What do they mean, Dorsey and Musk? Is it because of our AI age that we should simply get rid of IP?
The article isn't deep enough to fully get into it, but my intuition would be something like this. IP law, which is different than copyright, seeks to protect inventions from being leveraged and utilized by third parties without paying the inventor. When technology changes rapidly, two things happen. The first is that IP law becomes less relevant because nobody patented the new thing, and the new thing's the only thing that matters. And you know, imagine OpenAI patented its first LLM. Well, the new LLMs released this week don't look anything like the old LLMs already within a year. So the first thing is the world's moving faster than IP law can track, and the second is what are generally known as trolls appear, trying to make money by suing companies. And those trolls go and buy IP. They weren't the original inventors, but they buy IP with the sole intention of litigating against new innovators. And so Musk and Dorsey hate that. So I think they're you know, making a fairly extreme point that nonetheless has some underlying truth to it, which is IP law is counter progressive.
What's Jack Dorsey doing, by the way, now? We know what Elon Musk is doing. Why isn't he in the news more? Is he retired?
No, he runs Square, and he's I hesitate to describe him as a Buddhist because I'm not 100% sure that's what he is, but he certainly
needs to shave his beard off, I think.
I think he's in a kind of a personal meditative state permanently where he's trying tranquility, so he can make good decisions free of stress. That's his core, which is a little bit like my kids. You know, the most stressful thing you can do is get a job, so don't do that.
Yeah, well, that's the problem with having kids these days, Keith. In all seriousness, I mean, you go back in your good editorials, one of your better editorials, going back to 2012. It's always easier to see the past 13 or 14 years into the future. What are the big issues that are being resolved in 2025 that by the end of the 2030s, one kind of government or other might be relitigating? Is it, I mean, you mentioned I never really thought of that, but could OpenAI have turned LLMs into their own IP?
I don't think so, because there's a body of work leading up to OpenAI that was both published and open that they couldn't claim invention from. So I think the answer is no. And I think more and more research happens in public these days. You know, the famous one is that Google really invented what's known as transformers.
Well, they had a white paper on it and they chose not to they chose not to pursue that, and that's where I think Altman. I've done some shows on Altman. He took a gamble on transformers on LLM and won.
Yeah, exactly. So I think honestly, I never was a big believer in IP. I have filed a few patents in my time, mainly because my investors wanted me to, but I never believed that was the secret to winning. It is the secret to not being sued by third parties. Having your own patents mean
Well, that's why you have lawyers.
Yeah, exactly.
And that gives work and money to people like myself. So when it comes to the secret of winning, what are the secrets in 2025 that may become issues by the end of the 2030s that we can't even imagine? I mean, when no one ever really talked about some of this. I mean, I guess in some ways, some of the antitrust stuff came out with the Facebook acquisition of Instagram or some of the Google stuff, but we never really thought about it that carefully. What might be significant in 2025 that we don't, that we're missing?
I think that it's important to have a framing to answer that question, because there's all kinds of variables you could focus on. But I think if you want to really try to get to the essence of what's going to drive history, I think it's this conflict between deglobalizing at the national and political level and accelerated globalization at the economic and technical level. Those two are unhappy partners, and that means that the future leaders of the world are global thinkers living in a world where the political system is run by national thinkers, and that is kind of very interesting. I think the unknown, was it Rumsfeld who talked about
Yeah,
that?
Rumsfeld talks about
the unknown is really the impact of AI on employment and abundance, because obviously abundance changes all the variables, and what happens to people without jobs. Are they embraced by society and the abundance is used to raise everyone up, or do you get this bifurcation into very, very wealthy? Those are the parameters. An optimist will say we're headed for utopia, where nobody needs to work and everyone can eat, live, feed, be entertained. And a pessimist would say we're heading for an apocalypse, where it's a hellscape for anyone that isn't rich.
Yeah, and Ezra Klein's new book Abundance deals with this. It's as you say, the most important issue. I think it requires chess players, people able to think 5, 6, 7 moves ahead. The one person probably in Silicon Valley, or certainly tech person, able to do that, I'm not a great fan of ethically, but a very smart guy, Peter Thiel. I think he's probably thinking about some of these issues. We will see. Finally, your post of the week goes back to the theme of this week. Are Google and Meta screwed? But you're focusing exclusively on Google. It's a post from the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs at Google, a woman called Leanne Mulholland. We won half of this case, and we will appeal the other half. Is this Orwellian logic, Keith? 2 + 2 = 5?
Well, what's amazing is a Google senior vice president turned into Donald Trump when it comes to a legal case. Trump is very public about his opinion about outcomes that in cases he's involved in, but normally professional corporations stay quiet and work in the background. Leanne Mulholland chose to go public.
Leanne Mulholland, who I think is originally from Ireland, she runs all the regulatory affairs. So just to be clear here, because I want to vindicate my wife, Cassandra Knight. She runs litigation at Google, but she doesn't deal with regulatory affairs. So she's won all her cases. She won the Section 230 case at the Supreme Court. Leanne Mulholland is 0 for 3. She loses all her cases. So there are some winners at Google and some losers, and Leanne Holland seems to be losing all her cases. Well, so maybe this is desperate. She has to appear as if she's won to keep her job.
well, she's claiming a half win, and
it's like being half pregnant.
And then she's saying she's going to go on and win the other half through appeal, and she may well, maybe she will. But I think the government has reduced the scope of the accusation to such a small scope that, you know, it's probably hard to beat them. I do think the government's wrong, by the way.
Well, she says publishers have many options and they choose Google because our ad tech tools are simple, affordable, and effective. Is there any truth to that?
I think that's entirely true, yeah. I think she's right.
So are they screwed, Keith? Or is Leanne, what's her name? Leanne Mulholland, is she perhaps screwed rather than Google? Maybe she'll lose her job.
I think my answer on both points is, insofar as they're screwed, it isn't because of these legal cases. It's because of their ability to adjust to what's coming next.
But ultimately, Keith, I think your conclusion is everything can be blamed on Lina Khan, can't it?
Not everything, but many things.
I bet you were blaming Lina Khan when Manchester United was, what, 3-1 down to, or 4-2 down to Lyon with about 3 seconds left in the game, and you ended up winning 5-4. Was Lina Khan anything to do with that Manchester United revival?
She's a Lyon fan.
Oh, poor old Lina. She's lost her job and her team now is out of the Europa League. Well, Keith, good show. We will be back, no doubt, to talk more big tech, government overreach, the end of the West, and all these other big issues next week. Have a great week, Keith, everyone else, and we'll talk next week.
See you. Bye.